Hey guys, so today I'm going to teach you a little bit about how I start my leather projects, um, how to make a suit of armor. This is going to be a comprehensive guide from complete start to complete finish. This first video I'm going to cover basically picking out the design you want to go with. I'm going to cover where you're located and how to deal with the heat in a leather suit of armor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my process to prepare to actually draw the pattern on. Now, this is not going to cover the actual drawing of the pattern because there's a lot of stuff to cover before that, so I'm actually going to do that in another video. But I'm just going to show you guys how I get started. So, the very first thing I do before I do anything else is I do my research. I see what period I'm going for, what genre I'm going for. Most of the time my stuff is original creation stuff, so I don't do a whole lot of cosplay, but you can do the same thing with cosplay here. So there's several things you need to consider just real quick before we get started, and I explain how I do things. The very first thing, and the most important thing is how much of your body is going to be covered, and where are you located. Obviously, if you have a character that's, so let's say, Scandinavian in nature, you're not going to be able to do a full suit of leather armor and furs and be in the Texas heat. It's just not going to work. So you're going to have to sacrifice some historical accuracy. Um, but once you have your character picked out, once you figure out where your character is located, a little bit about them, you can kind of start to plan the best way to go about it. For me, being in Texas heat, I tend to use a little bit thinner of a leather. I use about a 6-7 ounce, which is, I mean, pretty thin. You generally consider armor grade to be about 10 ounce, so it's a little bit thinner. Only downside to using thinner leather is it's much harder to wet mold it and to shape it because there's not as much leather there to shape. So that's something you kind of have to consider when you're creating your costume. The other thing, just real quick, is that you've got to think about your body type. So for example, I'm a pretty big girl. I have pretty big boobs. If I'm creating a character and creating a design, I'm not going to do a really big sweetheart neckline because that's going to accentuate my chest. And that's not what I intend to do. So just some little things to think about before you start. And obviously, you're going to try it, trial and error. I really, really want everyone that watches this to at least attempt some kind of leathercraft, or at least think about it, because it gets scary jumping into a big, huge costume. It gets really scary when you're first starting. But the thing that's great about leathercraft is that it's very easy to get decent. Now, to get great takes a much longer ratio of time, but to get decent enough is pretty easy, and the only way you learn is by trying and by doing. So, with that said, let's get started. So, here's the tools that I use to first make my my guide for my pattern. You can do this on your body. That's how I did my first costume. But you don't necessarily have to. Sorry, I dropped my scissors. You don't necessarily have to. I actually have a dress form back here, and I've actually kind of home cooking this a little bit. But here's the tools you're going to need. You're going to need some tape. This is masking tape. I really, really recommend masking tape over duct tape. And I also recommend that you get it as wide as you can. This is 1.4 inches thick, I think. And it's Scotch blue. You really don't want to skimp on this. You really want to get the good stuff. I think I paid, I think it was like $5.40 for this at Walmart. And then I got 2 of them. This is basically one of these. And actually, I can show you. This is how much I have left. So you can see this was brand new. So you can see you use quite a bit of it. And you're also going to want to get 2 because if you have a tail or if you have a high collar, you're definitely going to want more of them. So that's that. You're going to need saran wrap. Any kind works. I think this is just great value saran wrap, but you can use colored. It doesn't matter. You're going to need a marker. I have a Sharpie here. You can even use a pencil if you want, but I find markers work better. And just some really strong scissors. Now, as you can assume, I've already done this. What I've basically done here, and it's going to squeak, sorry. What I've basically done here is I've taken saran wrap and I've wrapped it underneath. Now you really want to make sure, basically what you're doing is you're creating a guide to where you can draw on your pattern. And there's several different tips to this that I have. The first thing is, when you're putting your saran wrap on, you want to make sure that it's tight enough to cover the concaves of your body, but you also don't want to pull it too tight, because then it's not going to fit you when you're finished. Because this particular dress form, it's a Duretz, my size, I think, and you have adjustable dials. That's the one I would recommend if you're looking at dress forms. I think it's like $150, and they're so worth it. The panels inside of it, how it works is it has a round metal clasp. And the panels inside of it are going to compress a little bit when you put the tape and saran wrap over it because it's pulling it tight. So when you're making your patterns, keep in mind to make it a little bit bigger than you're thinking. I generally do mine about 3 inches bigger just so that I can have some room to play with. And most of the time what you're also going to do is belts down the side, and I really recommend doing that, because if it's hot and you need to get out of your costume, and there will be times where you need to get out of your costume, you're going to want to be able to get out of it quick if something happens and you need to get out of your costume. I actually, a couple years ago at a Renaissance festival, overheated, and it took me a long time to get out because I didn't have any belt straps down the side. So I had to just pull the whole thing over my head, and it took forever. So that you're going to definitely want belts. The other thing is, if you gain or lose weight, you're going to want, something that, a costume like this can cost a lot of money. I mean, generally about $400 is the range that I look at when I'm making a new costume. Maybe more or less depending on how much leather you use. But they're not cheap. So you want to make sure you do it right the first time. There is going to be some experimenting and there is going to be some failure, but that's just part of anything. So yeah, make sure you pull it tight, just not too tight, just enough to give, so like the concave of the chest and stuff. But you're putting tape on over it, so it really doesn't matter. When you put the tape on, what I generally do is I generally wrap it around the top first. You're really going to want to make sure, and let me bump this up a little bit. Yeah. So you're really going to want to make sure that you take this all the way up with the saran wrap before you put the tape on it. And if you don't, what happens is you have to put more saran wrap over tape, and then when you pull it off, you've got a fold. So it's just going to flop, and it's not going to look good. So it's just going to be a pain. So yeah, make sure it's all the way up at the top, and this is going to squeak, and I'm sorry. And in the back, I've made mine pretty, this is generally where I keep it. This is actually probably going to be a lot lower, but it's better to put more than not put enough. I generally put about, for the saran wrap, I don't know, 1 time around. It sticks to the tape, and it keeps the tape from sticking to the dress form. If you're doing this on yourself, you're going to need help, obviously. But, so for example, this method I do on my thighs, because I obviously don't have thighs here. And it tends to work pretty well. And then the sides, obviously this is where your arm goes, so you're not going to actually be able to put leather here. You're probably going to put pauldrons or something. So I generally tend to make that pretty low. But again, just cover the whole thing from the very top, because you can always make it lower. And the other thing that I do when I'm starting is that this tape up here, this is all wrapped all the way around. But in these little concaves and these, just the chest and up here, I put smaller pieces of tape. And the advantage to putting smaller pieces of tape is you get much more accuracy. You're able to fit those corners much better. The only thing with that is you really have to make sure that you flattened it down. So, yeah, that's a pretty basic guide. If there's anything you guys have questions about, just let me know. In the next video, I'll probably be talking a little bit more about customizing it to your body shape, how to make your body shape look good in a costume compared to in real life. It's just like clothes. If you try on a dress, it's not always going to look good on you. So you have to kind of think of those things. You've also got to think about flexibility. How much maneuverability do you need and do you want? And you've also got to think about the concaves of your back, especially if you're a woman, because women have much more hourglass shapes, obviously. So really making sure that the leather doesn't fold on itself, even when hardened, is really important. And you can do that by adding layers. But we'll talk about all that next time. But yeah, it's pretty simple to get started. You are going to need help, like I said, if you don't have a dress form. Guys, get a dress form if you can. They're so worth it. I didn't want to get one for the longest time because I didn't have the money for it. And then I just got one. I think this one, again, was like $150 or something. They're so worth it. So, they are. Anyway, so if you guys have any more questions before I make the next video, let me know. This was kind of a lot of information real quickly. Try to slow it down a little bit more next time. Anyway, thank you.